Hey, welcome to the virtual book launch. I'm Kim Eldridge or Kim Galloway, depending on how you know me. We're going to start letting people in, so give me just a moment. I'm so glad you're here. Get everything set up. Hey, everybody, I'm just letting everybody in to the actual event. And go ahead and pop into chat where you're coming in from, and welcome to the virtual book launch party. This is a ton of fun. Usually I'm the one behind the scenes, like doing the tech. So getting to do this for myself, absolutely so much fun. And we are going to go ahead and record this so I can send out the replay. And we're just going to give everybody, I don't know, like just a couple more minutes to hop in. Nellie is already asking, do we buy your book from here? Absolutely, Nellie. So as you know, the purpose of a virtual book launch is not just to celebrate the book, but also to buy the book to create that bestseller. So here's your buy link right here. And then when you buy, pop in chat to say, got mine. And I'll be thanking people as we go along. So I'm just going to give everybody, I don't know, about another 30 seconds or so to come on in. And then we will officially get the party started. So thanks again, everybody, for coming to the virtual book launch party of my newest book, The Art of Folding Paper. And if you are new to my world, because I do see a couple of new names here, I publish under Kimberly Eldridge, which is my maiden name and who I was when I wrote all of these. But professionally, I do go by Kim Galloway. So let's go ahead and get started. You know, it's been a minute since I've done a virtual book launch for my own book. Usually I'm doing this for clients. And so the goal of a virtual book launch party is, of course, to launch the book. And one of the best ways to do that is to create a bestseller. So when you grab your book, go ahead and say, got mine. And then I'm going to ask you to do something else. You're going to get a book for yourself and have Amazon send it straight to you. And then order a second book and send it to a friend. Now, here's the thing. You might be like, well, my friend lives next door. I'm just going to send two to me. I want you to do it in two separate transactions because Amazon looks at that as two sales, where one order that buys two books, they only look at it as one sale. So that's a sneaky little kind of behind the scenes view of one of the ways that when we have a best-selling book launch, we are able to reach that bestseller in an authentic way is by helping people help Amazon to know that we're selling a bunch of books. Now, the goal of tonight is not for me to give a primer about how book launches work. It's really to get to celebrate this book. So as you are coming in, go ahead and tell me where you're coming in from. And then you can get your book directly from Amazon right here. And be sure to pop into chat when you get it. Or you can actually go back to Kim's book launch and use that link that is on that page too. Both of them work. Both are where we are able to buy the books directly from Amazon. One of the questions that I do get asked is, how come there isn't a Kindle version? And the answer to that is there isn't a Kindle version yet. Because when you have your paperback version and your Kindle version, Amazon has those two as products and they're competing against each other. So for the sake of having a best-selling book launch, we only release one at a time. So Andrea's coming in from Pittsburgh. Thanks so much for coming in. I know it's a little bit later over there on the East Coast. And Steve says, it's after midnight in the UK. and he must get to sleep. Good luck with the book. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. That just absolutely makes my day. So you can buy the book too. It should be available on Amazon.uk. I do not have that link, so I will trust that you are able to go ahead and find that. So Nellie got mine. Thank you. Thank you. You guys are awesome. So one of the really interesting things about this book, I mean, it's a modest little book, guys. Like this isn't a 300-page opus here. But one of the really interesting things about The Art of Folding Paper is who I was when I wrote it. So as you are coming in, go ahead and zip over to Amazon and buy your book. You do a second transaction and buy another one for a friend. And before I start reading from the book, I want to share with you a little bit of who I was. So you may or may not know, but I actually have a degree in creative writing from the University of Arizona. And yeah, my dad let me go to the U of A without a backup plan. And I did end up, sorry, those ring lights look great on me, but kind of lousy on the photos. So this is me right here in the U of A sweatshirt. And this is actually a group of friends. Thanks, Nancy. She says, got mine. This is a group of friends when I was studying abroad in Spain. So while I absolutely went to school without a backup plan, and I do have a degree in creative writing, once I got there and started taking some Spanish classes, I really liked speaking Spanish. And I do have a degree in Spanish as well. And I am technically fluent in that you could pop me into any Spanish speaking country and I would be just fine. I won't say I'm fluent in such a way that I could like do legal documentation or work as a translator. So one of the neat things that I got to do a lot when I was in college was travel. And my favorite thing to do was to travel to foreign countries to attend writers' conferences. And one of the places where I got to go was the summer literary seminars. Sorry, I have to hold the photo at kind of a strange angle, or the ring lights just get ringy. I didn't think about that. So these are photos from when I was actually in Russia on a program called Summer Literary Seminars. And I was in St. Petersburg, Russia. I was all of 19, maybe 20. I was the youngest person there. And I had an absolute blast attending the ballets, going around the city, and perfecting the writing craft. And so there are actually stories in this book that are from that time when I was in Spain. Now, if you're doing the math, you're going, Kim, these stories are over 20 years old. Yeah, actually, they are. And so putting on my book coach, best-selling book strategist hat for just a minute, all too often we think that just because something is old, it's no longer worthy of putting out there. And sure, a 20-year-old kid writing short fiction is very different than a 42-year-old mom of four teaching people how to write. I am a very different person and I'm a very different writer. But does that mean that I shouldn't honor the dreams of who I was then? Of course not. But I will say that 8 years ago, I paid to have this book edited. And when I got back the edits, I just about cried. She did a decent job on like the first story that I had sent her. But as she was doing more stories, her edits got worse and worse and worse. And Kim of 20 some years ago did not know the difference between a semicolon and a hole in the ground. Kim of today has learned just don't use semicolons because I still don't really use them properly. So I just mostly don't use them. But this editor, she was awful. And what happened as part of my journey as a writer, it broke my heart. I had paid her money to do this, and this was not something I could publish. Even I could see that the edits weren't great. So I did what a lot of my clients do, and I put it away in a drawer until this spring when I decided to release a course I had dreamed up a decade ago and had done nothing with, and to pull these stories, this book, out of the archives and to publish it. And one of the things that I did, this was a very intentional choice. I decided not to rewrite or edit any of the stories. I had Holly do grammar, spelling, punctuation, because again, semicolons. But I decided not to take the wisdom of all of my years now and try to apply it to the youthful love of the stories and how the stories were put together and how the characters worked. I really decided not to do that. Because what I wanted to do was I wanted to honor this girl. This one's me. I wanted to honor who she was when she wrote these. And I just want to show this one because seriously, come on, focus, buddy. Are you going to focus? Maybe it's not actually in focus. Yeah, it is. Let me see if I can get this to focus on it. Gotta love those cameras, right? It can't focus on that. Seriously, look at how skinny I was. So we're here to honor Kim of 20 some years ago and help her not just know that we published the book, but that it also went to a bestseller. So if you have not grabbed your copy yet, please do that and then pop it into chat. Got mine and got yours for a friend so I can thank you. So there are 9 stories in the art of folding paper. And I'm going to read to you part of my favorite. I'm going to read you part of my favorite. This was, I almost went a different way on the titling of the book. So this story is called A Secondary Color, and it's the final story in the book. Nice central location, the realtor's ad promised. Quiet, friendly neighbors, close to shopping center and schools. It said nothing about being next door to a house the color of a grape bubblegum. Ethan sighed and climbed out of his tan Honda. 6 months ago, he'd spotted the ad on a real estate website and had agreed to buy the house without flying to see it. Well, he admitted to himself. He had seen the photos the realtor had emailed, photos of the outside and the main rooms. There had been no photos of the purple house. Ethan's new house was a nice, respectable beige, with neat hedges and an arched trellis near the front door. There were a few weeds in the flower bed. If the second stairs squeaked, well, that would give him something to do on his breaks from painting. The house's main attraction had been the backyard studio, a studio with huge north-facing windows and just a bare concrete floor had sealed the deal. Ethan had packed all the art supplies he owned into the Honda and put the New York art scene behind him. He was here to paint the pictures he had always wanted to paint. He was currently working on a series of cityscape paintings that each featured a detailed depiction of industrial districts. Ethan enjoyed painting the large expanses of gray, the concrete walls, the asphalt roads, the smoke belching into a cloudy sky. Ethan also wanted to get away from all the eccentricities of New York. Ethan was tired of artists who could not paint on Tuesdays and cabbies who sang opera in traffic jams. He was sick to death of goth or steampunk or rocker-dressed New York residents who thronged the sidewalks with no order or sense to their movements. You're crazy, Ethan, Meg had told him, furiously stirring the pot of spaghetti sauce simmering on the stove. You haven't even seen it, and you're moving to the Midwest? New York is where all the hippest art stuff happens, you know. Meg had been Ethan's girlfriend at one time. The mahogany red of her hair had drawn him across the art gallery to ask her out. The lack of order in her life and her lack of a college art degree had driven him away. I know, Ethan answered, but I'm tired of New York and I don't want to be hip. He poured the pot of noodles into the colander and ran them under hot water. He should see steam curl up into his face the way it always did on TV, but the water in his apartment building never got that hot. You don't have to rinse them, love. See? Pre-washed. Meg tapped one grubby fingernail against the cardboard box, leaning her elbow on the counter. The toes of one bare foot trailed against the top of Ethan's sock. Beside, she continued, stepping away from the sink and back to turn the heat off on the stove when it became clear that Ethan wasn't going to answer her. How are you going to sell any of your art out there in the farmland? I'll sell enough to get by. I sell enough now. Humph, Meg answered. I hardly think that the commissioned pieces you did of all of those sedans counts as selling enough. For crying out loud, Ethan! All you painted for 3 months was painting after painting of brown four-door sedans, all from the same angle. I was well paid for that series, and that is exactly what the client wanted. No, Ethan, it was what you wanted. Brown and beige and boring. Live a little. Embrace your eccentric side. Give voice to chaos. I'm tired I'm tired of eccentricities. Apparently, I can't actually say that word out loud. It's spelled correctly, though. Get the bowls out. These noodles are ready. The whole world is eccentric, Ethan. Get used to it. I'm not eccentric, and neither is Kansas. Thus, the basis of its appeal. But someone obviously had not told the owner of the purple house that painting a house bright purple was eccentric. Ethan tried to forget about the purple house next door as he unloaded his boxes into his house. He'd arranged for the non-art related things, the secondary trappings of life, to be shipped ahead. The boxes would be stacked neatly in the living room, he told himself on the long drive from the city to Kansas, labeled and ready to be put away. The boxes were in the living room when he arrived, but they were in disarray. The large box at his feet, neatly labeled kitchen stuff, had one corner dented in. The printed-on arrow was pointing, most explicitly, at the carpet and not at the ceiling fan. Ethan ignored the boxes in the living room for the moment and carried all of his art boxes to the studio in the backyard, lining them up against the wall with the ones labeled paint on the bottom and the cardboard tubes saying brushes and unstretched canvas on top. As Ethan was organizing the boxes in the living room into categories, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, closet, office, under the bed, he realized that the boxes hadn't been thrown as haphazardly as he thought. At least a third of them were strategically placed to cover up stains on the carpet. Excuse me. Rent carpet cleaner, Ethan wrote on his mental to-do list, right under organized studio and buy groceries. He didn't usually add punctuation to his mental lists, but he thought having a new studio to set up deserved a bit of celebration. But first things first, food. Ethan tried not to think of the giant blueberry next door as he pushed his creaking shopping cart up and down the narrow aisles in the supermarket. He pretended not to see the tubes of royal violet paint when he thumbed through the scanty selections of canvases and brushes at the art store. He firmly turned his back to the window that night and he crawled between his respectable white sheets and closed his eyes to the purple glow of the house's porch light. The house will be a different color in the morning, he told himself as he strove to find sleep. It will be tan or white or even a nice pale cream. It will not be purple. Ethan repeated this as a mantra instead of counting sheep. It will not be purple 1. It will not be purple 2. It will not be purple 74. It will not be purple. The house was still purple when Ethan woke up at 3 that morning to stumble to the bathroom. It pulsed like a garnet, lit from within. He pulled the sheets over his head and counted backward from 1,000 as fast as he could until he got tangled in the numbers and fell asleep. His dreams, usually images he later put into his paintings, wet sidewalks, great buildings, and mellow winter skies, had been monochromatic, in purple. So this is just a little excerpt of one of my favorites, which this story is called A Secondary Color. So if you are just joining, because I kind of was clicking folks in, be sure to go and grab your book and then say, got mine. So let me put that link in here. I don't know if you guys can see the chat when you join later. Link to Amazon. So we are coming to you from my brand newly remodeled office. What do you think of my barn door? Isn't it just gorgeous? And my office is not purple, although my dress is. My office is a nice calming shade of blue. And I do think that it's a little echoey because I'm not fully moved in. Shocker, right? So a secondary color and Sea Turtle Wedding from this book, The Art of Folding Paper, the whole reason we're here today, were both written when I was attending summer literary seminars in Russia. And I have a couple more pictures that I wanted to show you. So this one, oh, come on, you silly lights. Can I reach? Let me see if I can reach my offs. Here, we'll just turn these off for just a hot second. There, now I'm dark, but the photo looks perfect. So clearly, this is me, the blonde girl in the middle. And this is Josip Novakovich. So he is, okay, Nellie says we can just see me and from those who join the chat from when they join the chat for it. That's what I thought. So Josip Novakovich is obviously one of my teachers, and he is one of the greats in contemporary fiction. And Josip is not American. And I don't think he was Russian either. I'll have to look it up. I didn't think about that. So we actually met at a cafe. Our classes in Russia met at a cafe. And the funny thing was, this little coffee shop didn't know how to make a mocha. So in my really poor Russian, I had to teach them how to make a mocha. And so if you've never been to a writers conference, they're really awesome. And what we would do is we would bring pieces to workshop. So I was actually writing a lot of my stuff when I was there, and then I'd have them printed at the office of the summer literary seminars, and we would pass out copies of the stories and have these stories workshopped. And that feedback from other fiction writers was invaluable. And a really interesting thing that I tried to bring forward into my business of helping people write their books, all y'all hate it. That idea of workshopping with your peers, you guys really hate it. Very common out there in the literary. So, and then this is the last, I think this is the last photo from Russia that I really wanted to share, because this is my friend Nina, who was a graduate student at the time and is now working as a full-time professional author. And this is my friend Risa, who is actually having surgery tomorrow. So prayers to these ladies. These were my best buds in Russia when I was there. So if you've just joined us, absolutely go grab your book and then post in the chat that you got yours, and if you sent one to a friend, so I can honor you and say thank you. Now, the way a book launch works is we have to have the most amount of sales in the least amount of time to move a book up an Amazon bestseller rank to hit that bestseller. Obviously, to stay on the bestsellers, it's sales over time. But the way I work my best-selling launches for myself and for my clients is the idea is to pack in those sales into the smallest amount of time possible. So before we started, I went ahead and checked sales ranks, took some screenshots. We will not get live updates on this event because Amazon takes a little over 3 hours from the time they start seeing the sales to the time they start updating the rankings. And what I have discovered after having run dozens of these best-selling book launches, that 3-hour clock starts when the host of the book launch says, hey, buy my book, which is why we kind of started from hello, go buy these. And when people actually start doing it. So that 3-hour launch can actually turn into 3.5 to 4 hours. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that's not my ideal evening is to have a party for 3.5 to 4 hours, virtual or otherwise. I like sleep. I really like sleep. And Ben has just come home yesterday he was on the road for 3 weeks. And I was not sleeping. While he was gone, this hitch, if it wasn't a kid, it was a dog waking me up. Which all of this to say, go buy your books. Go buy your books, go buy your books, go buy your books. And then we will do some update emails tomorrow. I'll know tonight whether we hit the bestseller and how we end up on that rank. But I won't, I'll send it out tomorrow. Okay, so I want to do just a little bit more. And we're going to skip ahead just a little bit to my favorite part of the story. Let me find it here. Okay, so just to kind of catch you up here, Ethan goes and confronts the house, and he has a uncomfortable and decidedly magical confrontation with this purple house. So if you aren't entirely certain what the stories in The Art of Folding Paper are about, they're not exactly magical realism. They're not fantasy, so they're not like swords and sorcery and knights on epic quests. They are fantastical. So many of them are rooted very much in the real world, but there's always this element of the fantastical and fantasy. And what happens when you push just a little bit? And it was really interesting because one of my early reviewers said, well, Kim, these don't have like a theme. No, they don't. They don't. And I probably should be a little bit more overt with that, that they're not all a book, they're not a bunch of stories about XYZ. It's a stories from a period in my life. And the thing that does, I think, go through all of these is they're not teenage angsty. Okay, maybe a little bit. I can see it a little bit now, but they're not like, oh, woe is me, that teenage angst that often comes in young writers. Not writers who are young in the craft, but chronologically young. And because of that, in rereading them earlier this year, that was my final determination as to why it was time to go ahead and get this volume out, because they definitely weren't angsty. They weren't angsty. Now there's a couple that kind of get a little bit angsty, but for the most part, they're not. So I'm going to invite you again to pop in and go grab your book and grab another one for a friend, because having those sales really does help. And just so you know, like I've emailed, I've posted, and I think I sent out probably 20 or 30 texts that were all pre-scheduled to go out right at 4 o'clock. So, okay, so coming back to Ethan. He has this magical encounter. Amethyst, he decided in the shower. The king hadn't been so much purple as amethyst. He tried to remember if the whole king had been purple or just his robes. He dressed mechanically, thinking pointedly about lizards. As Ethan tied his shoes, he decided that the king's skin had been violet, his robes amethyst, and his hair lilac. Kings should have white hair or none at all, Ethan told himself firmly as he got into his Honda and drove to the grocery store. The shopping cart had a wiggly front left wheel that squeaked as Ethan pushed it up and down the rows. He was more aware of the colors of the food and even the colors of the packaging than he had ever been before. He was examining a can of mushroom soup, enjoying the play of the green label against the dull silver of the can, when he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. An incurgus jar of pickled eggplant sat next to a nondescript can of beans. That's another word that I can write, but I can't say out loud. Incongruous. Beets? Ethan did a quick double take. Now there was a jar of pickled eggplant, the can of beets, and a blueberry. One blueberry sitting on the shelf with the canned goods, 5 aisles away from the produce section. Blueberries even in season? Ethan wondered. He looked more closely at the 3 items. The eggplant floated in its juices and looked decidedly green and slimy. But on the label, a bright purple eggplant curled its leaves into the writing of the brand name. He stared at the vegetables floating in the jar. They were not even remotely purple colored. The blueberry rolled on its side. Ethan jumped back and stared at it from across the aisle. It seemed like a harmless blueberry, but nothing, he decided on the spot, nothing purple was harmless. He crept closer after a moment when the food showed no more signs of movement. Beets aren't purple, he told the can of beets. They were pickled too, julienne style. Beets are red, or at best, mauve. Mauve is purple, the beets said. Ethan went back to his shopping cart with the wiggly left front wheel and pushed it to the pasta section. He refused to contemplate what a conversation with a can of beets signified about his mental health. A package of royal noodles fell off the shelf and landed at Ethan's feet while he was looking at the boxes of linguine. He picked up the plastic package, the noodles inside shifting against his fingers. A king that looked uncomfortably like the one in the purple house stared up at him from the package. No, he told it, putting it back on the shelf. He went back to the linguine. Satisfied with the store brand, after carefully checking the package to make sure there was no purple ink, he put it in the cart next to the package of royal noodles. Ethan stared at the noodles. He knew he had put those back on the shelf. You can't come, he told it, putting it back on the shelf with the other packages of royal noodles. A young mother with a solemn-eyed toddler eyed him sharply from behind her shopping list. Ethan shrugged. It jumped into my cart. She nodded, but backed away, putting her cart between herself and Ethan. He pushed his cart away, humming. Have a good day, he called over his shoulder, not knowing if he was talking to the royal noodles or the lady. Ethan knew he was taking a chance, going to the produce section where he would be faced with berries of all shades of purple, plums, grapes, and fresh eggplants that were much more intimidating than the pickled eggplant floating in the juice. Not to mention the small florist department next to the display of apples, which were sure to have orchids, mauve roses, and pansies. He wanted peaches. Mauve is purple, he told the roses as he walked by, before they had a chance to say anything to him. Examining the bananas, he thought he heard singing. He looked around, but there was no one else in the produce department. He was sure it was singing and not piped-in music. He put his ear next to the bananas, but he didn't notice anything other than the smell of ripe bananas. Is that you singing? He asked them. No answer. He didn't think there would be. He stood up again and selected his bunch of bananas. He put it in the cart next to the store-brand linguine and a purple onion. He picked up the onion and hefted it, then brought his arm back as if he was going to throw it into the mirrors behind the iceberg lettuce. The lettuce heads nestled comfortably next to the purple cabbage. There didn't seem to be any green cabbage. Ethan dropped the onion back into his cart, not caring if it bruised. I'm going to cut you up and cook you with the linguine, he told it. Now, he said, raising his voice and addressing the whole produce section. Who is singing? Try the grapes, a voice behind him said. Ethan jumped and whirled around to see the speaker. He stared at a small woman with flyaway brown hair mashed into a yellow knit cap. Excuse me, Ethan said, taking a step back and really looking at her. Her sneakers were canary yellow. Her pants were buttercream. Her blouse a dark yellow, almost orange. Even the rims of her glasses were yellow. It seems you have a purple problem, she said with a smile, gesturing to his cart. What? Ethan stuttered, staring into the cart. There was a carton of blueberries next to a box of mixed berry popsicles. A head of purple cabbage nestled against the purple onion, and they both sat on a case of purple plastic wrap. The pickled eggplant was in a line with the can of beets and a jar of grape preserves. Ethan looked closer and saw that there was also a jar of grape jelly, raspberry jam that was unquestionably violet, grape jam with no seeds, and grape jam with seeds. A can of wildflower bug spray, printing in shades of lavender and lilac, bumped companionably against a bag of grape jelly beans. An eggplant shared a corner of the cart with a fabric softener, dishwasher detergent, and an amethyst washcloth with lilac flowers printed on it. A huge bouquet of orchids, pansies, and violets sat in the child's seat. Squished into a corner and lurking forlorn was the package of store brand linguine. The family-sized package of royal noodles supported a large bunch of seedless purple grapes. The grapes were singing softly. So, to find out what Ethan does with his shopping cart full of purple produce, I'm going to say, you gotta go buy the book. You gotta go buy the book. So, this is Secondary Color is one of my all-time favorite stories in the book. And it was so much fun to write because, again, I was in Russia. So their grocery stores were not at all like the grocery stores here. And while the internet existed in, what was this, '01, maybe '02? Let's see if it says in the back. No, I don't know. While the internet existed, you want to know what didn't exist? Smartphones. And so I had my laptop, and I remember holding up in the hotel room in Russia, writing this story, and having to use my own imagination to figure out everything that was going on because I didn't have the ability to Google anything and say, like, what's all the purple produce? And I have to say that those are some of my fondest memories. I was in Russia for 4 weeks over what's called White Nights. So it's like now-ish, the end of July and the first part of, or the end of June and the first part of July. In fact, it was the only time I've ever been out of the country for the 4th of July. And all of our Russian friends decided that that just wouldn't do. And they took us on a boat cruise for the 4th of July. So here I am with a friend heading out on a midnight 4th of July boat cruise where we would go out into the Gulf of Finland and you'd watch the sun go bloop or below the horizon before it came right back up. So talk about not sleeping. It never got dark there. In the entire 4 weeks that I was in St. Petersburg, Russia, it never got dark. Not once. So I'm sitting in my hotel room. It was more like a dorm room, and I'm writing these stories, and there were, I swear, mosquitoes the size of small children, and it was hot, and it was humid, and I was suffering from some extreme culture shock. I had just spent 3.5 weeks in Spain with my grandmother, and I put her on a plane to come back to the States, and I went to Russia by myself, where I didn't speak any Russian. And guys, not only did I not speak any Russian, I had, bought like a how to speak Russian, like cassette tapes with a workbook. And of course, I didn't do it because I was a college student, like I was like, I'll just figure it out. I also didn't know that Russian uses an entirely different alphabet, Cyrillic. So we're driving from the airport in this van with other Americans who are coming to this writers' conference, and I'm looking out the window going, oh my gosh, not only can I not read these signs, I don't even recognize these characters. And the amazing thing about travel is how much it busts you out of your comfort zone and how much it creates creativity. So there's 2 stories in here that I wrote while I was in Russia. So the first one, and they're back to back in the book, Sea Turtle Wedding and A Secondary Color. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about specifically about this book is the fact that these are award-winning stories. So I have some of these. Yeah, oh my gosh, Jane, I was so far out of my comfort zone. I was so far out of my comfort zone. And then, so I think it was a 13-hour time difference between where I was in St. Petersburg and where my parents were in northern Arizona. And, you have calling cards at the time. And I had this phone and I had this narrow window at like 6 in the morning when I could call and reach them. And thank God it wasn't like a rotary phone. Like it had buttons, but if you screwed up at all, it would disconnect. If you even looked at the phone funny, it would disconnect. There were no such things as payphones. The cell phone that I had had in Spain only worked in Spain because they were country specific at the time. There was no such thing as like a phone that worked in various countries. All the SIM cards were specific. And it was the very first time in my life where it was almost impossible for me to call home. It was so hard to get the tech to do it. And then I promise you, I won't tell you too many stories about Russia. I just haven't thought about it in years, and it's just so fun. We weren't allowed to take our hotel keys, which were not plastic key cards. They were like a physical key out and about to the city with us in case we lost them. So we had to check them in and out of the hotel room, the front desk. And I don't speak Russian. And so I would go and I would say in English, hey, I need my key. And I would go like this. It was really rude to point and to hold up your fingers. So I would do it flat on the desk. 423, because that was my room number. And I just could not get that. And finally, they taught me how to say 423. And do I remember it? Of course not. Of course not. And then the word spasiba is absolutely butchered, but that was how I learned it. You use that for thank you and you're welcome. And like that was what I could do. But half the time it came out placebo because, you have this 20-something incredibly earnest college student who's well out of her comfort zone, trying to make friends. It was one of the most painful and biggest growth of my entire life. It was just awesome. So what I wanted to share with you before I read you a little bit of a different story is I have some of these stories that were they were published in other books, and we have to acknowledge when you do that, when you do your own anthology, you have to say where other things were published, and you actually have to like make sure that you still have rights to your stories before you can republish them. So I just want to say a big thank you to William H. Horner, who had published 3 of my stories for me when I was just starting out. So the first ones were Olympic Politics, which was the first time I won a award and a monetary award for my short fiction. Cuts and Folds, and then Crows Are Black. And then Secondary Color and Sea Turtle Wedding also appeared in my honors thesis. So I kind of count that as a publication and that like you could go and look it up. But so if you have not bought your book yet, go get your book. Here, let me pop up the link and then be sure to say got mine. Now, if you're coming to this virtual book launch party and you're like, why does she keep saying that? Why do I keep reminding you to go buy your book and to go buy a second book? Because I kind of have to. Like, that's the point of these. It's not just to, drink water because, well, I have a raging headache. And it's not to hear some of the behind the scenes stories of the stories themselves, but it's also to support the author who wrote them. So when I host these parties for my clients, I'm like pinging the author, like, tell them to buy the book, put the link up, tell them to buy the book. So that's why I'm doing that. Okay, so I want to read you a little bit of this one called Story Time. And this is the shortest story in the book. And I think it's really fun. I think it's really fun. And again, it's not angsty, but this is one of those ones where you can really see my youth on the page. So, story time. Tucker sat restless at his computer, staring at the half-finished story on the screen. This was to be his big break. Tomorrow, he'd turn it into his TA and get the first A of his college career. That is, if he could ever finish the story. For some reason, the words weren't flowing, the characters were flat and lifeless, and the plot was completely uninteresting to him. Why? He demanded of the ceiling, throwing up his hands. He pushed himself out of his chair to pace the room, avoiding the piles of dirty laundry, school books, and pizza book boxes that littered the floor. Why? He asked again. He ran a hand through shaggy brown hair, adjusted thick glasses, and sat at the keyboard again. He rattled his fingers over the keys, not typing anything, just trying to fool himself with the sound that he was being productive. He checked his watch. 4:37 a.m. The story was due in a little under 3.5 hours, and he only had a page and a half. He didn't even have a title. Why did he listen to Krista when she told him that all true art comes from suffering? She'd convinced him not to start until the night before. Ideas were supposed to flow better under pressure. Groaning, Tucker bounced his forehead on his computer desk, making the mouse jump and the screensaver turn off. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Tucker sat bolt upright, eyes darting from one end of his shabby loft apartment to the other. There had been a spree of robberies in his building in the past week. Who would be ringing his doorbell at this hour? Package delivery, a voice called from the other side of the door. It was locked with 3 locks, but Tucker was still uneasy. Tucker pushed himself to his feet slowly, easing his way to the door, crunching a wayward pencil in his path. He wished that he still had a baseball bat, but he sold his the week before to pay for peanut butter and day-old rolls. Who's there? He called through the door, peeking through the peephole. Outside, a man stood with a clipboard and a small box wrapped in brown paper tucked under his arm. Other than the fact he was dressed all in green, he seemed to be a UPS man. He raised his fist and pounded on the door again. Look, dude, I've got a million other deliveries to make tonight, so would Tucker Jackson just open the door and sign for this? Tucker could hear the exasperation in the man's voice. Even though a little voice in the back of his head was screaming at him not to do it, Tucker unlocked the door, signed his name, and collected his package. With trembling fingers, Tucker tore into the package. A single object dropped into his lap. It was a very unexcited black-barreled ballpoint pen, the type of pen that he could pick up in any doctor's office. There was no note. Sighing, Tucker shoved the pen into his shirt pocket and sat back down at his desk. The pen leaped from his pocket, smacking hard into the side of Tucker's nose, and then dropped into his open hand. He bit off a scream. Then his mouth fell open as he watched his right hand close around the pen, bring it to the screen, and start scribbling across the glass. It was impossible. Yet, it had to be, yet where his hand moved, words flowed onto the screen, words of such eloquence it almost made him cry when he read them. He tried to stop himself, but the pen kept writing and writing until there were 12 pages, all neatly typed. The hand holding the pen jerked, poked at the icon for print, and then fell still in his lap. After Tucker read the story, he was amazed that he'd even written it. Not only was it an amazing story with complex characters and a wonderful plot, it was free of anything even remotely resembling a grammatical error. Smiling widely, Tucker dropped the pen in his backpack, put the story neatly in a folder, and trotted off to class to hand it in to his TA. Sitting nervously in class, Tucker shuffled his story to the front of his folder. He kept wanting to reread it to make sure that it was real. Even though it was the best piece of writing he'd ever done, he couldn't help but feel like he'd cheated. After all, he told himself, it hadn't been him doing the writing. It had been the magic pen. Hey, dude, could you look at this? The punk rocker boy sitting in the chair next to him leaned over to ask. He passed Tucker a sheaf of dog-eared pages held together with a bent staple. Tucker took the offered pages and began thumbing through them. He felt a jerk in the region of his breast pocket where he'd clipped his new pen to his shirt under his sweater. He pushed his glasses up his nose and tried to focus on the story. His shirt jerked again, and then with a violent tearing noise, the pen pulled free from his shirt, ripped his new sweater, and landed in his hand. Quite without his control, Tucker watched in horror as his hand moved of its own violation over the punk rocker's story. Where the pen moved, the lines of type rearranged themselves. Writing words of such eloquence, he was nearly moved to tears. Tucker wasn't sure if they were tears of appreciation of such fine artistic work, or tears because the pen was rewriting somebody else's story. He glanced up to see if the rocker was noticing anything unusual. He wasn't. The end of the story couldn't come too soon for Tucker. He felt as if a 10,000-volt searchlight was spotlighting him. After the pen had written the last page of the story, Tucker handed it back to Mr. Punkrocker. He couldn't help but notice that the pages seemed less dog-eared than before, and the paper itself even seemed whiter. Here, man, not too bad. Tucker's hand trembled as he handed back the paper. Okay, class, pass up your stories, the TA called from the front of the class. Tucker blanched, realizing he sat in the front row. 6 stories would be passed up to him from the back of his class. Already, he could feel the magic pen beginning to hum in his hand. So that's the entire story. That's the entire story that I just read you. Like I said, it's the shortest one in the book. And to me, that one has pretty much the most trappings of that youthful college age, don't have much experience of how the real world might work feel to it. But it earns its place in the book because I think it is also very indicative of where I went with the fiction that I wrote after these stories were written. And you have to understand, like most of the time I write nonfiction. And there's actually a story in here that's called Halfway House to Heaven, which is very experimental. Nobody has ever liked it, and it is written in second person. So the point of view character is you. You do this, you do that. And it was when I was learning how to write. It's actually the oldest story in the book. And the reason it has a position in this book is because it's experimental. Because it is very polarizing. Or maybe people just really don't like it, and that's fun to me. But what I think is really interesting is that now in my professional life, I write almost exclusively in second person. So when you're writing your articles for your blog or for your newsletter, when you're writing to your people, great, Jane got it, ordered it. Thanks, Jane. Awesome. I so appreciate everybody's support. So when you're writing your articles to people, you say, we have options, right? We can say, I did this, I did that. And that's okay to the person who's reading it. I'm talking like nonfiction articles or even for your book. But oftentimes your reader is like, well, how do I see myself in this first person narrative? Okay. You can write we, so that's first person plural. We do something, we have the same challenges, we do this. And as an expert in whatever your field is, what that does is that puts you on the same level as your audience. And so oftentimes in our articles and even in our books, our nonfiction books, we write you. You do this, you do this. I used to have this problem, but now I can help you do this. Because what that does is that elevates you, the writer, to you, the reader, and it creates that distance. So Halfway House to Heaven has its place in this book because it was the first time I had ever played with second person. Second person is not a good choice for fiction. It's not a good choice for storytelling. And like I said, nobody likes it. Even some of the reviews on Amazon are like, yeah, I don't like that story, which just kind of thrills me because it's not in there to be liked. It's in there to show how far I've come as an author. And yeah, I will be the first to admit that the other thing about this book, it's a little bit of an ego trip, right? Thanks, Sherelle. Glad you got your copy. So it's a little bit of an ego trip. Not for me, Kim, with all these kids and a thriving business and 20 other books that I have written and published with my name on the cover, some of which have been bestsellers, some of which haven't. It's for the Kim of who I was. And that person, if you saw my email a few days ago, this Kim, who was in Spain, her friends told her she talked about writing too much and really encouraged her to give up on her dream. Clearly, I didn't. And there's definitely a part of me who, when I published this, um, mhm, you know, just a little bit with that. So the last piece that I want to leave you with, one of my other really favorite story from the book, I'd have to say secondary color is right up there. My other two favorites are Olympic Politics and Cuts and Folds. So Cuts and Folds is the reason we have these origami cranes on the front of the book. And in a nutshell, I was really into origami at the time, really into origami when I wrote when I wrote that piece. And I had my first ever online business. I had just graduated from college, and it was called Eat, Stay, Play, America's Recreation Connection. And the idea was that we would be a single clearinghouse for anything outdoor recreation related across the entire US, focusing on camping, fishing, and hiking. I had no clue what I was doing, but I have been online for over 20 years. I've had lots of online businesses. Okay, I've had the two. But what I was really interested when I wrote that book, when I wrote that story, Cuts and Folds, number one was origami and all this computer programming. I wasn't doing it myself, but I was really working closely with some programmers who were very in over their head. They were really in over their head. Okay, I had a couple people just pop in, so here, go buy your book. Go buy your book. And Cuts and Folds really came from these two loves. And one of the things that I really wanted to do as an author was figure out how to bring in things that I was interested in, those strange little, I don't want to say that they're like big hobbies that we run in on, but those smaller bits of hyper focus. And when I was in high school, I had read an anthology of many different authors, and one of fantasy, but one of the authors had written a story about frogs. And it was like folklore with frogs. And I don't know how much she had made up and how much was like actual folklore, but it all came together in the story. And she said that her son had gotten really interested in frogs. So she was reading all these frog books with her kid. And for a short time afterwards, a bunch of her stories were decidedly froggy. And that stuck with me. This idea that you don't have to write your stories with themes for your entire life. So, Cuts and Folds, I was really into origami, and my life was consumed with computer programming. And that's where that story was really bubbling up from. Olympic Politics is the story that I feel really launched my career as a writer. This was the one where I went from I'm a writer, somebody who writes, to I'm an author, someone who's published. Because this one, it won an award, I got paid for it. And the really interesting thing about Olympic Politics is, again, it was based off of this, like, what am I really hyper focused on right now? What am I really interested in right now? It was my last semester in college, and I was taking an elective. I never took electives. Like, guys, I never took electives. I had 8 semesters to get my degree. I had a double major. I had zero time for just electives. What I had was a hole in my schedule between two classes. It was the first and only semester I lived off campus. And I just didn't want to have a hole in my schedule. So I was taking an entry level to Greek mythology with one of those professors that's like those award-winning professors. in a giant lecture hall. And so I had all of these Greek gods and goddesses walking through my head. And this was this story that I basically woke up one morning, I knew all of the plot points, and I wrote it in like 3 days. It would wake me up early in the morning, and the whole thing just boom, like popped out of my head. And what's really kind of cool is the current reviews on Olympic politics are like, oh, it's like Percy Jackson. Oh, it was written 3 years before Percy Jackson and the Olympians was ever published or put to paper. And I'm sure Rick Riordan was probably working on Percy at the same time that I was working on Olympic politics. But Olympic politics is not fan fiction. It predates Percy Jackson by 3 years. Okay, so I had a couple people just pop in. Go buy your go buy your book. Go buy your book. Go buy. And then pop in and say, got mine, so I can say thank you and be sure to grab one for a friend. Okay, so when I have read all of Olympic politics, it takes like an hour. So we're not going to read all of it because my husband is making my all-time favorite dinner tonight to celebrate. And I don't know if you can see, but I'm like getting redder and redder. My air conditioner is right there and it is incredibly loud. So it's also incredibly off. And it's almost 100 degrees outside. So I'm in a garage. So thanks, Erin. Erin got it. Erin is also known as Lucky 31. One of my clients, Sherelle, who's on, is one of my clients. Nancy's a client. That's you guys. So we're going to finish off with a little bit here of Olympic politics. What's my favorite dinner? Okay, Nellie, I'll tell you. It's called steak and skinny noodles. When Ben and I were first dating, this is a fun story and it has nothing to do with writing. When Ben and I were first dating, he was getting his flight certificates. He's a helicopter pilot. So he was learning how to fly helicopters. He had gotten his degree. He had done 8 years, I think, in the Air Force, and he was back on the GI Bill to learn how to fly helicopters. And that's when he and I met. He was broke. I had just started my business. I was broke. And so oftentimes we would eat a London broil for dinner. And if you guys have ever had a London broil, it's this thick, cheap cut of meat. I will, Nellie. And it is incredibly tough. And so after a couple of years of eating London broil as if it was a steak, he set out to make it delicious and tender. So he has this whole thing that he does with a London broil, which is marinating and slow cooking, and then he is slow cooking on the barbecue. Ben only ever barbecues. So he partially cooks it on the barbecue, and then it goes back into a skillet with some type of salad dressing and sweet peppers that are cut into chunks. And then my purpose is to make the noodles, or noo-noos, as my kids call them. Erin says, we used to eat London broil all the time. Yeah, it's a good iron. There's good iron in London broil. And so then I make the skinny noodles, which is angel hair pasta. And so I boil up a big box of that, and then it's dressed with butter, parsley, dried parsley, garlic powder, not garlic salt, lots of red pepper flakes, and then the juice of a lemon and lots of butter. So you put the noodles in the bowl, you put the meat and the juice and the peppers on top, and you top it with some parm. And my kids eat steak and skinny noodles like it is going out of style. Everybody's favorite dinner. So that's what's for dinner. I told him, I'm going to go do this, and then we're going to go have steak and skinny noodles. And it's going to be a great evening. So Olympic politics. This one was submitted to the Gotham Writers Institute, which if you write fantasy, science fiction, it is like the Summer Writer Institute. And the reason they didn't accept me and this story is because they said I used Deus Ex Machina, which means literally the hand of God. The hand of God comes in and solves the challenge of the story. Y'all, y'all, you're gonna have to read this. This is the opening story. Of course they use Deus Ex Machina. It's about the Greek gods. Where else are you going to use it and get away with it? By thunder, Zeus exclaimed, sitting up in bed, clutching a silk sheet around his nakedness, white hair and beard in disarray. What is that racket? Hera! He stumbled from the bed, trailing the sheet down the marble hallways, yelling for his wife and the guards and his breakfast. Bursting into one of the larger throne rooms in the Olympian palace, Zeus allowed the sheet to puddle at his ankles. The sudden banging of the door interrupted the band practice that had been going on. Apollo! Zeus yelled, waiting for his son to disentangle himself from the three women wrapped around him and from the drum set he was perched behind. Zeus ran a hand across his forehead, causing his eyebrows to stick up as much as his hair. Yes, father? Apollo asked, joining Zeus in the hallway just outside the throne room. He was finger combing his hair into place with one hand while trying to button the fly of his Levi's with the other. Problems, sir? Problems? Of course there is a problem. What are these mortals doing here, and what is all that noise? You do realize you woke me up, don't you? Zeus glared at his son, trying to muster all the dignity a naked, crazy-haired, middle-aged former deity could display. Zeus was suddenly very aware of the fact that he wasn't wearing any clothes, and that the gaggle of women giggling at Apollo were standing in the doorway, staring. His hands twitched at his side, wanting to cover his private parts or reach for the sheet, or both. He forced his hands to be still. It's just band practice, father, Apollo answered, twitching at his pants and grinning over his shoulder at the women. This is Fuchsia's daughters, Apollo said, waving his hand at the band members. They giggled. Fuchsia? Who's Fuchsia? I've never heard of a god by that name. They aren't named after God, father. That's the name of their band. They're very big in the States right now. Apollo was taking that annoying, condescending tone that all teenagers seem to acquire the moment they think they know more than their parents. To the eternal annoyance of the Olympian gods, Apollo would never get out of the terrible teens. It was his nature to be a teenager who had trouble with women, meaning that he wasn't supposed to be having relationships, let alone a whole pack of women dangling all over him. Well, teenage know-it-all aside, Apollo looked like he had gotten over his women problems. Send them home, Zeus said flatly. Now. But father, Apollo began, whining. Zeus made a throwing motion with his hand, wishing he had a thunderbolt or at least a stiff drink. Apollo turned and slunk back into the room, muttering to the women that they had to go home. He was the picture of a pouting 16-year-old who hadn't been allowed to drive the car. Zeus collected his discarded sheet, throwing it pointedly over one shoulder, not wrapping it around the sensitive bits of his anatomy that were beginning to get cold, and strode back to his room. Hours later, Zeus emerged from his room, washed, oiled, and with a solid meal of nectar and ambrosia in his belly. The strange creatures Hephaestus had created attended him. There were no slaves anymore in Olympus to attend the gods. Hera had thrown the last of them from the mountains some years back. Zeus hadn't wanted to interfere with his wife's rage as she muttered darkly something about all men being free and equal under God. Zeus hadn't been sure which god she had been referring to, but it certainly wasn't him. He had the sinking feeling that he was talking about that upstart, bearded, grinning idiot who thought he should be omnipotent and omniscient just because he was the Lamb of God. The Olympian gods were stuck rinsing goblets and making their own beds for a few weeks because of it. Now these strange creatures of Hephaestus's, Zeus thought as he strode around the halls of Olympus, they were a piece of work, not really alive and certainly not mortal. They had too pale skin, no hair, and gold under their fingernails. Every night they stood motionless on the balconies. Hephaestus called them androids and said they were collecting starlight, their power source. Zeus didn't like it at all. Hera! Shouted Zeus, startling an android that had been busy polishing a brass shield hanging in the hall. The creature jumped and sped away on silent feet. Zeus called it back again before it reached the end of the hall. Where is my wife? He demanded, staring over its head. The android raised a hand and pointed with one gold-tipped nail down the hall. Like that was a lot of help, Zeus muttered as he strode down the hall. Why couldn't Hephaestus have made those things so they could talk? Hera! He yelled. Zeus finally found his wife in the South Solar, preening in front of one of the new mirrors Hermes had brought back on one of his voyages to the mortal realm. Hera, my beauty, why do you bother with this mortal nonsense? This new silvered mirror. Why don't you use the brass one I gave you? Zeus sprawled in a low chair upholstered in blue leather, kicking one leg over the back. He felt a breeze swirl around his nether regions. He'd never give up the old style of dressing like Apollo in most of the court. Do you like my earrings? Hera asked, turning from the freestanding, gilt-framed mirror. Zeus stared at her curvy body snuggled into a tight red something or other, accentuating her breasts and hips. Well, she asked again. When Zeus didn't answer, she swayed over to him, peering at him from under lowered brows, her tongue moving against her lips suggestively. She flung one leg over his hips, her skirt riding up her thighs. ... So at one point, I taught high school, and somebody thought it was a good idea for me to teach high school Spanish, and then they decided that I should teach Latin. I don't speak Latin. And I was in my early 20s. And I was also not brave enough to tell my high school students, hey guys, I don't really speak Latin either. I'm like 3 lessons ahead of you in a correspondence school, so let's figure this out together. So when I decided quite abruptly that I was no longer going to teach and decided to leave at the end of the semester in the middle of the school year, I had one last class that I had to fill. And so I read them Olympic politics and had to edit some of it on the fly to take out the racy bits. So when you, as adults, go and read The Art of Folding Paper, which includes Olympic politics, you get to enjoy all the racy bits. And no, they're not that racy because I was 20 when I wrote it and there was no race in my life yet. And so Olympic politics is what happens if Zeus wants to come back to power. There's a bunch of inside jokes in that story because I had just spent an entire semester really invested in the Greek gods and who they were, how they worked together, what they were gods and goddesses of, what were their primary godly duties, what were their secondary. There are so many inside jokes. So Apollo, you might know, like pulls the sun around the sky, right? He is also the god of music and is perpetually a teenager, which is why him hanging out with a band is an inside joke. And so Hephaestus was he's god of the forge, and he would build things. And there's lots of stories where he's building like autonomous creatures. So there's just an awful lot of really funny little bits in there that are only funny depending on how well you really know your Greek gods and what they do. Um, and there's just one little like caveat that I want to put on that. Um, it because it's asking the question, what happens if the Greek gods raise to power? It is not very friendly to the Christian God, which is not my perspective, y'all. That is just the perspective of the gods in the story. So, yeah, this one helped me get that award. This one won second place in Fantastical Visions. The editor, his name's William H. Horner, thought it was absolutely super duper smart. Just a really smart retelling. And it's really interesting. I have a friend right now who wants to write her novel. So we're on Marco Polo all the time talking about storytelling and writing her story. And she's embroiled in all of this research. And I was like, yeah, but the real key is to have this giant base of research knowledge, but not read like a textbook when you're putting it into fiction. She's writing a historical, not romance. She's not quite sure yet. So I'm not 100% certain if I was looking back at Olympic politics with the benefit of years, it might feel a little heavy-handed with all of those inside jokes. But for what it is and who I was when I wrote it, wow, it's one of my favorites. Okay, last chance, go buy the books. You will get, I will send updates out probably tomorrow. I'll stay up late tonight and see how this looks for how we're hitting that. Yeah, it's not easy not to sound like a textbook. Um, and I'll be like, um, there is 100% Deus Ex Machina, the hand of God coming in to fix the end of the story. And it wasn't because I wrote myself into a corner. I had planned it that way. That when God saves another God, of course. So I'm going to read to you just a little tiny bit from Cuts and Folds. Because between the three, Olympic politics, Cuts and Folds, and a secondary color, I don't think I could pick which one's my favorite. So I'm going to read you a little bit from this one. So Cuts and Folds. A world without cuts is a relatively new thing. Haiji remembered being 14. He sat in a sprawling lecture hall to hear a storyteller who had come down from a mountain sanctuary to spend 1 week among the students. Twice a day, groups of students from the various apprenticeships gathered in the lecture hall to hear the stories. As a soon-to-be scientist apprentice, almost done with his tenure as a science student, Haiji felt he had better things to do than to listen to a storyteller. Students, a level 4 master said from the stage. Slowly, order came over the hall. Students, the storyteller has asked for 5 volunteers. As I read your name, please come forward. So much for volunteering, the girl sitting next to Haiji whispered. He nodded. A moment later, she was called to the front of the lecture hall. When the master had his 5 volunteers, he stepped off the stage, looking like a skinny mother duck trailed by 5 ducklings in bedraggled student coats that were too short in the arms with frayed pockets and hems. Now, the thing about Cuts and Folds is it jumps in time back and forth, which if you've ever written fiction, that's a tricksome thing to do. That's a very tricksome thing to do. So in the layout, I have denoted it not just with a space, but with actually like a graphical showing. So I'm showing you to tell you like we're jumping in space. And the thunder's getting closer. So we're gonna wrap this up soon because even though I have a battery backup, my whole business is on my computer. So I shut down when the thunder comes. So go buy your book. Here, link again. Go buy your book. Paste. And if you've already grabbed one, thank you. Go get another one. Perhaps this is not the way to go about it, sir. We don't really know why the ancients designed it that way. Haiji looked up from the computer to give his apprentice a flat stare. She took a step back and stuffed her hands in the pockets of her blue lab coat. Blue for apprentice scientist. You will never become a master scientist if you don't take chances, Atsu. Haiji's voice was mild. It was still early in the day. There would be plenty of time for Atsu to drive him crazy. She never seemed to be able to see the endless possibilities inherent in their work. Sir, she said, turning away. Gordon was promoted to master last week, Haiji called after her. Isn't he younger than you? He watched her reaction over his shoulder, for once his fingers still on the keyboard. He was always better at me at quantum calculus. Bullshit. No, he was. Atsu, the reason Gordon is a master and you are not is simply because he is willing to take a chance. What is the worst that could happen? Master Haiji, Atsu said, suddenly formal. Haiji felt his lips curl into a cold grin. He loved it when she was off balance. A scientist shouldn't only be concerned with what is possible, but also with what is responsible. Haiji turned back to his computer. He heard Atsu walk away, her sensible, hard-soled shoes clicking on the lab's concrete floor. Everything is possible, he muttered to the screen, already absorbed in his work. Haiji carefully scrolled through a screen of code, looking for programming bugs. It, like every computer program, gave the machine very specific instructions and parameters. Haiji had debugged hundreds of programs during his 23 years as scientist. Ordinarily, he would just run the program, entering in systematic data designed to test the program's responses. Good data should produce expectable results. Bad data should produce the error messages that were written into the code itself. For example, a date that was entered in an incorrect format would yield the phrase, date field incorrect. In this program, however, there were no preconceived error messages. This program had to be written perfectly and debugged from inside the code itself before it could be run. All data supplied to this program had to be perfect to the letter. There could be no errors, not with this program. This program he was writing would be his greatest yet. It would be the greatest program ever written by a scientist. Above Haiji's desk, suspended by a near invisible length of filament, a single paper fish turned in the breeze from the computer's fan. Break. Time jump. Haiji's puzzlement about the nature of the volunteers was cut short by the appearance of the storyteller on the stage, followed by the 5 science students. I will give you a demonstration, she said simply. Her voice, Haiji was disappointed to note, was ordinary, carrying nothing of the fire and thrall that storytellers were rumored to possess. Since you are scientists, she nodded briefly to the room before continuing, you believe what you see. See this. The 5 students lifted something from the stage floor. They lifted a huge square of green paper, holding it delicately as if they were afraid it would tear. At a gesture from the storyteller, they turned, showing the hall the edge of the paper and then the white back. Watch, the storyteller commanded. The 5 students on stage, with no obvious direction from the storyteller, laid the paper colored side down, then seemed to dance. One student held a corner while 2 others pulled the opposite corner to meet it, then out, then another corner and out. The students moved with a borrowed grace not usually seen in adolescence, dancing under the gaze of the storyteller. The paper on stage was folded again and again until a small, irregularly shaped bundle lay on the stage. Haiji couldn't take his eyes off of it. He didn't notice when the students left the stage or even that the storyteller was missing. There was something very important about that piece of paper, something that Haiji recognized, but something to which he couldn't relate. The hall was quiet for a moment, then puzzled chatter began. Haiji didn't notice the noise. He concentrated on the paper. I will tell you a story. The first sorcerers were born from an eel egg, set upon land to hatch. When the egg hatched, 500 emerged, terrible in beauty and terrible in evil. They spread, no 2 staying near each other. The sorcerers went into the earth and were quiet in the way of evil things, and waited and watched and learned many mysteries. Some sorcerers remained close to the surface of the ground and learned the darkness between the stars and heard the laughter of things dying. Some went into the sea and found the cold depths and the salt and the cutting edge of sand. Some went deep into the earth and found the rage of stone, molten by fire, and the feel of cold iron and steel. And one sorcerer, the brightest and most terrible of them all, was not content to stay close to the ground and see the star dark. Nor did the killing salt and cutting sand satisfy him. He found no dark joy in raging fire and cold biting steel. This sorcerer took his magic and sought the darkness. He left the land that gave him birth and walked in the starlight. The land was still then and gentle, for the other sorcerers were gathering their power and knowledge slowly, and the men of that time walked easy upon the land under the sun and were content to raise their cities and civilizations. Each side, the sorcerers and the men knew of each other, but wars were small and blood was only fertilizer to the ground. The sorcerer who left the land and sought the blackness found more knowledge than he hoped for. Out in the cold reaches of desolation, the sorcerer found space and matter and bent them to his will. But his thirst for power was endless. The sorcerer found time. And so in the rest of this story, we go back and forth between the present day scientist and his apprentice and his rival. And it's interwoven with this story, this myth that the storyteller is telling. What excites me about this story is I have always loved to tell myths, not retell, but just create them as if they were ancient mythology. And Cuts and Folds is where I got to play with how all of that went together. So I want to thank you for joining me this evening. Clearly it is getting dark and it's gonna rain, and my dinner will be ready shortly. So I want to invite you one last time to go and grab the book, to grab a second copy. And if you're like, okay, I don't really know who to send a second copy to, or I don't know what to do with it, libraries are always willing to accept books. Whether they put them in their collection or not, that's up to them. But oftentimes they can resell it to fund their library. They're always happy if you say, hey, this is a friend of mine. She wrote this book and I would like to donate it to your collection. Librarians eat up free books. So yeah, thanks, Jane. This book made me remember how much I had enjoyed writing fiction. And so thank you for joining me for the virtual launch party, for helping me buy the books. We will get our results sent out tomorrow. And no matter what, this was a wonderful way to spend an evening. So thanks again. You guys go off and enjoy, and we will talk tomorrow via email. The wind just came up. Take care.